Hi everyone, welcome to the March 4th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Mulkowski, and got a big weekend of racing on tap, some Derby preps taking place around the country. Craig and I are going to focus on one of those as part of a late pick 5 sequence at Gulfstream Park, where the prep that they're running late in the day on Saturday is the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth, offering 50 Kentucky Derby qualifying points. That is the local prep for the Grade 1 Florida Derby. Craig and I will dissect that race as part of that late pick 5 sequence, but it's an all stakes sequence. We've got graded stakes throughout, beginning with the Honey Fox in race 9, proceeding on through the Gulfstream Park Mile, the McDiarmida on turf, and closing things out after the Fountain of Youth, the last race of the day, the Here Comes the Bride. And Craig, I feel like it's a pretty good mix of races. As I was handicapping this, I thought that there were some favorites that I didn't really want to try to beat, and then there were some races a little bit later on in the sequence or scattered through where some of the favorites looked vulnerable, and I could make some cases for bigger prices.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. I think some of the races look short, some look a little more interesting than others. And yeah, I just want to say for me, this is the first really big day of racing this year where there's just good cards all across the country. We chose this one, but we could have went in a lot of different directions. But I think it is a good, solid sequence.
Yeah, Craig, I don't know how much you looked at the Gotham or the San Felipe or some of the cards out at Santa Anita. I am looking forward to the Santa Anita handicap. I have kind of become a fan of Stiletto Boy, as I think you have, and he's a horse that looks like he's found a pretty good spot in there. We'll see what a horse like Express Train does. The San Felipe, to me, was just totally up in the air. I think there are a lot of question marks in that race, and personally, I even found the Gotham a pretty fun race to handicap. I know it's not a race that produces a lot of Kentucky Derby starters in recent years, with not a lot of connections who have Derby horses wanting to go that one-turn mile configuration, but I thought that race was totally wide open.
Yeah, I agree. I also want to mention, I know you tweeted out earlier that maybe it's time for the Gotham to be at 1 1/8 again, and I do tend to agree with that. I know we're getting off subject a little bit, but I thought it was a really interesting point, and I think it does it's a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're not going to get a lot of Derby horses out of the race when it's only a one-turn mile this late in the year.
I know, we had a very big field drawn for the Fountain of Youth, and I saw some connections saying that they were not pleased with their post positions, but nobody was really considering shipping out to the Gotham for that one-turn mile. They want to get that 2 turns, even if it's that weird mile in the 16th configuration at Gulfstream Park. But we're going to talk about the Fountain of Youth in a little bit. As I said, we are going to go through this entire late pick 5 sequence at Gulfstream, and Craig, things start off in race 9, the Grade 3 Honey Fox, going 1 mile on the turf course for the fillies and mares, and we've got a few runners in this race that are coming out of that Pegasus World Cup filly and mare turf, which was won so impressively by Regal Glory. Some horses who finished 2, 3, 4 lengths behind her that day. How do you view some of the horses coming out of that Honey Fox, and do you think that they're the center of this race, or is there more going on here?
I personally think they're the center of the race. I think particularly Alms and Gift List, especially. And I'll be honest, at first I watched the replay of Gift List run in that race, and I really wanted to be down on her. And honestly, I think she had a perfect trip, other than the pace was pretty quick, and she was pretty close to it in there, and flattened out a little late. But the more I looked at Brian Lynch and his numbers, he just seems like a guy that doesn't have them cranked up very much first time out. And second time out, they do tend to run much better. So Giftless is going to be a must-use for me. I would say the same for Alms. I'm not sure she's a horse who actually wants to be on the league like she was in the Pegasus. She's not going to have to worry about that today, but I thought she ran very well in defeat, being able to hold on, beating everybody but Regal Glory in there. So I do think the race starts with those two. I guess an interesting horse in here would be Jouster, who had a very good beginning of her season once she moved to turf last year, had some nice wins, but she's been on the bench since July. And honestly, she's the kind of horse that looks to me like one who probably just maybe developed a little earlier than some others. I think there's some other speed in here. I know it's always dangerous at Gulfstream Park to not use a Todd Pletcher horse, but she's one that I'm actually not going to use in here. So I'm curious. I'm sure you'll get to her, but yeah, I'm interested to hear your take on all of those.
Yeah, just to comment on some of those horses coming out of the Pegasus filly and mare turf, I pretty much agree with you. You know that I liked Giftless last time as well, and I thought she got a good trip. The one thing I'll say about her trip is that she looked a little bit keen in the early stages of the race. She was tugging on Julien Leparoux a little bit, and sometimes you do see that with horses coming off long layoffs. They just have trouble settling in their first start back. So I would anticipate that they're going to get her a little bit farther off the pace this time, which I think is going to be a good thing, Craig, because I'm looking at this TimeformUS pace projector, and it's predicting a fast pace, and sometimes I'm skeptical of that in turf routes, but this is a situation where if this field holds together and there are not significant scratches, it feels like they've got to be moving up front, because there are many of these fillies and mares that want to be forwardly placed, and you brought up a good point, or a good horse to talk about in Jouster, who I think is one that you really do have to make some decisions about in this race. She is drawn inside of all those other speed horses. The pace projector does not depict her in front, but I'd be surprised if they don't ride her to get to the lead at all costs, because she is a horse that when you look at her PPs, she has never been headed in the early stages of a race. She's one of those horses that just needs to be free running in front, probably in front by a length or two. So we'll see how fast she has to go to get that early advantage. But yeah, I didn't know exactly what to do with her form that tailed off at the end of last year. She was running some speed figures in the middle of her 3-year-old campaign going back to last spring that don't put her that far off some of the older horses in this race. It's not like she'd have to improve that much. I think you make an interesting hypothesis about maybe she was just a horse that developed early. I think that could be valid. I also think it's possible that maybe she didn't like the turf conditions that she found in her last few starts of 2021. I think she's the kind of horse that really wants to hear her feet rattle. I think she likes the really firm going that she got early in the year. And her last few starts, if you look at some of the track variants and even the track condition ratings and the TimeformUS PPs, 3 turf courses in a row that were rated a 7 out of 10. I wonder if just that's not the kind of going that she really wants. The pace of the Lake George, it kind of came apart a little bit. She was setting the fast pace. So I'm not going to hold some of those efforts against her too much. And I think getting back to Gulfstream, where when they don't get too much rain in the area, and I don't think they have recently, the turf gets pretty hard and plays to her running style. So I'm viewing Jouster as a win candidate here. I don't know if we're going to get that 9-2 morning line. Maybe some people will be scared off by the pace situation, but I think that she's actually pretty good, and I will not be surprised if she does pretty well in this race. But I agree with you about Giftless, Craig. How are you looking at some of the closers? Is there anybody that you think could get involved from the back of the pack if you agree with me that the pace is really going to heat up?
Yeah, and I do. I kind of alluded to that in a little bit as to why I didn't like Jouster as much as I might otherwise. But yeah, I do think the pace is going to be pretty quick. The one closer, the one obvious closer I would lean to would be Bipartisanship. As I watched her last race, which was at Pegasus, even though she seemed to flatten out a little bit, it did seem to me like she kind of got stopped. She got caught in a couple switches. Never really was able to get that full momentum up. So even though the pace was fast, I don't think it was the perfect trip for her because she did encounter some traffic. So if things break right, I think she's the one that will be closing at the end. And another one I think there would be a danger coming from off the pace, which might sound a little bit funny because she's went wire to wire the last couple times, is in Italian. I know we talked about her on the TimeformUS Pacecast, and I don't really think this horse is a front runner. I mean, she's obviously good enough to do it if she has to be, but she's taken the lead in her last 2 in just crazy slow paces. If you look at her debut, she was able to rate pretty comfortably off horses and make a nice finish. So I wouldn't be surprised if she was able to adjust to a change in tactics here.
Yeah, I agree about Bipartisanship. She's kind of the one that kind of sticks out at you as the horse that could be way out the back early and make that big run if the pace does totally incinerate. Though I would anticipate that Giftless will be closer to the back of the field than the front of the field as opposed to the way she was ridden last time. So I think both of those horses could be ridden as closers in this race. And as for in Italian, I agree with you about her last race, and it was visually impressive. And I do also think that she's going to have to come from off the pace here because it just doesn't seem like she possesses that natural speed to be as forwardly placed as some others in here. I mean, you've got a sprinter like Keen Watifa in the race that if she stays in is going to really force the pace because she's a fast horse. I don't know if she's necessarily a turf horse, but she does feel like one that has to be forwardly placed if she stays in this field. And as for in Italian, My one problem with her is I feel like she has to get bet down because she's 8-1 in the morning line, but she's the lone Chad Brown representative in this field. Irad Ortiz is riding. She's got that visually impressive win. She's all upside, and I just feel like she's a horse that is probably going to go off at a shorter price, maybe even half the price of that. We'll see. It is a competitive field, but kind of looking through this, I would think that a horse like Bipartisanship might actually drift up a little bit, whereas an Italian could drift down. So it is one of those races where, as the first leg of the sequence, you'll get a peek at the toad board, so you can sort of let price be your guide as you make some last minute decisions about how to structure your tickets. But she's the kind of horse in Italian where I really would base my opinion of her on the price, because I think she's talented, but I'd want to get closer to that 8-1 because she does have a lot to prove.
Yeah, and I think we're going to talk about a couple horses later on in the sequence like that as well. Unless I missed it, I don't think you mentioned Alms much. What did you think of her in here?
I found her to be kind of a tricky call because she did run her best race last time, setting the pace. Like you, I think she is more versatile than that, but I can't say that I love her prior form. I didn't really view her as a top contender coming into that Pegasus World Cup, so I was a little bit surprised by her performance. I think the slight turn back to a mile works for her. I just wonder how close she's going to end up to a pace that I really do think is going to heat up, and in that situation, I almost prefer a horse like Jouster, who might discourage some of the early speeds, because I think that she's the one that is going to make the front. So I kind of want the speed of the speed in that situation rather than a horse that might wind up chasing. We'll see how it works out, but I viewed her as more of a backup type than a horse that I really wanted to key on.
Yeah, the other horse that's kind of low on the morning line I wanted to mention was Waka Naka for Bill Mott, who ran first time in the U.S. after shipping over from Italy in that Pegasus ladies turf, filly and mare turf. But I just couldn't find a lot to like there. It seemed to me like she got a great trip. She saved ground, had some pace, didn't really have much traffic trouble, and didn't have much kick left. So she's the one I wouldn't use really under any case.
Yeah, we agree about her. I thought she was the least interesting of the horses coming out of that Pegasus filly and mare turf. Maybe Jose Ortiz getting aboard attracts some more money in her direction, but yeah, I thought there were others that were a little bit more interesting coming out of that race. Let's move on to the second leg of the sequence and over to the dirt course. Race 10, it is the Gulfstream Park Mile, Grade 2 event, going the one-turn mile on the main track at Gulfstream. And Craig, we kind of have a rematch here of the Fred Hooper, which was won by Speaker's Corner over Fearless. Those two drew well clear of the rest of the field. I think almost 10 lengths clear, as Speaker's Corner did hold off Fearless in the late stages of that race. There are more horses in this race. I would say it's a deeper spot field. They're not the two standouts, but I do think that they're the two horses to beat.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but it's definitely a deeper field. I'm almost embarrassed to say I played a straight exacta last time, but when they've run away from the field like that, I guess it was probably the right call. And they both look decent in here, but there is some other competition. So it's one where I'm going to spread a little bit wider because I'm pretty short in a lot of different legs in here. I do think Speaker's Corner is an A type in here for me, whereas Fearless would be more of a B or C, because I didn't see a whole lot that would make me think Fearless is going to turn the tables on him. I guess you could point to the post position with Speaker's Corner being more inside, Fearless not being drawn on the rail. But the way he runs, I'm not sure the post position really matters a whole lot for Fearless. He just doesn't get out of the gate all that great. Takes a while to get going. So I just think Speaker's Corner is always going to have a tactical advantage. A couple others I do want to mention, though, were one at a big price is the 5-horse Injunction. We haven't seen him since November at Churchill, but he's a horse who's just been in crazy good form his last couple times since he put the blinkers on. He's won by a combined almost 15 lengths, I believe it is, in those two starts. Ran some really nice speed figures, and this is obviously a jump up in class, but at 20-1, I have to have this horse on my tickets. The other two I'm a little less interested in, but not sure what I'm going to do with them. I don't want to get knocked out if they win. The first one would be New York Traffic, who we haven't seen since late October, but I mean, he's a horse who's capable of winning this race. He's run some 120 speed figures. He won his last race against New York breds, admittedly, but with a nice figure by 8 lengths. So I think he's got a shot in here. And Another one that I think's pretty tricky, and I wouldn't really like him at 6-1, is endorsed, but I suspect he's going to go off a little higher than that. I don't know if I'm buying that morning line, but I think he ran deceptively well in the Pegasus. He was within striking range of a fairly fast pace set by Life is Good. He didn't back out of it all that far, ran a career best figure for him. And what I really like is the elongated distance. He's a horse who had been toiling at 6.5, 7 furlongs for a while. And I just think a mile is more to his liking. So I'm going to use him at on my tickets, thinking he's going to be higher than that 6-1 morning line.
Yeah, as for the Fred Hooper discussion, I agree with you that Speaker's Corner is the one that I want out of that race. I thought he faced a somewhat contested pace. It's not like they were flying on the front end. I know the TimeformUS pace figure line is pretty even, but he did have company on the front end, and I like the way that he put those horses away, and Fearless came to him at about the 3/16 pole, and Speaker's Corner really never let him get within a length of him. He really held that horse at bay, and I liked the way he kicked on once Junior Alvarado really asked him to run. Before I talk about some of the other horses that you mentioned, Craig, I just want to get your opinion on one thing. Speaker's Corner, just given the allowance conditions of this race, is picking up 6 pounds on Fearless from that Fred Hooper. Do you put much stock in that? Does that matter to you, that kind of weight swing? Or are you just viewing the result last time as probably going to hold in this race?
Yeah, I mean, it matters. When I look at the figures, I use the weight on adjustment. So it actually shows Speaker's Corner and Fearless with similar figures. But I just saw my eyes told me that I don't think the weight's going to make much difference. Because as you said, it's not like Fearless was coming at him late and making a big run and almost got there. He ranged up like he was going to be a real danger, and it just never really materialized. So it is a few pounds. Maybe if it was even a couple more, I would give it more notice. But I do think it's a factor, but a small one and not enough for me to turn the tables.
Yeah, I knew you were going to bring up Injunction, Craig. I know that's a horse that you had liked last time at Churchill Downs, and he really showed up that day. That 118 TimeformUS speed figure puts him in line with those horses that are coming out of the Fred Hooper. We'll see if he's actually as high as 20-1. I would imagine that even you don't need a price quite that high on him, because there are things to like about this horse. And I mean, he's being ridden by last year's champion Eclipse Award winning rider. So I would think that more people are going to latch onto this horse than those 20-1 odds would suggest, but I think he's a horse that you can certainly make a case for here. He does have to step up again. This is a big move up in class, but he's definitely one that has shown talent so far in his short career, and we'll see how the pace shakes out in this race. I would imagine that horses like Injunction and New York Traffic are going to have to be relegated to a stalking position outside of Speaker's Corner. I don't think Speaker's Corner was a horse that needs the lead, but given the fact that he's drawn inside of the other speed horses, I think Junior has to be aggressive enough to hold that rail position with him. So we'll see how, if he's ridden the same way that he was as he last time in the Fred Hooper when he went gate to wire, but I would anticipate that that will be the plan. I'm not as big of a fan of New York Traffic. I do like him better going one turn as opposed to two turns. I think the fact that they're finally focusing on some shorter races is a good thing for him, but I wonder if he's going to get back to some of the bigger speed figures that he ran early in his career, especially when he was a 3-year-old. He returned with a nice race at Belmont last year when he launched his 4-year-old campaign. That's one that I think a speed figure that's proven to be a little bit dubious over time. And he just kind of kept going backwards from a speed figure standpoint last year. And I've been watching some of his recent workouts coming back for this return as a 5-year-old. He actually worked in company with the other Saffie Joseph horse in this race, Collaborate, on February 20th. And if you're just looking at the workout times, you might assume that New York Traffic outworked Collaborate because New York Traffic was credited with a faster time. But I think that kind of exemplifies the value in actually watching the workouts, because Collaborate actually outworked New York Traffic by a few lengths and galloped out much stronger than him. Don't know why they were credited with opposite times, but Collaborate, he is just a really good workhorse, and I know he's one that's been kind of frustrating for Saffie Joseph. I think there was a time last year when Saffie Joseph called Collaborate the best horse that he's ever trained. It hasn't worked out that way. Craig, I know we mentioned his last race on the Pacecast a little while back. he ran well, but he's never really taken that speed figure step forward that you'd want to see for a horse that's now launching his 4-year-old campaign. And also the other thing about Collaborate that I do want to mention, and he's 8-1 in the morning line, so if you think that's fair on him, you should bet him by all means. But the other thing I want to mention about this horse is he's had some issues that his connections have talked about with, I think, a breathing issue. I think he's also had some bleeding issues in the past. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that I had read that at some point. And his best races have come with Lasix. And when he's tried stakes company in races where Lasix is prohibited, he really hasn't shown up. So that's a big concern with me for Collaborate, a horse that does seem to have a lot of natural talent, but has not really put it together in the afternoon. And Craig, just before I throw it back to you, I'll say that I echo everything that you said about Endorsed. I don't love him as like a horse that I'd make my top pick in this race. Like you, I think I would go to Speaker's Corner for that. I just trust Speaker's Corner a little bit more, and I think the mile distance is really perfect for him. But I do think that Endorsed ran well last time, and I think he's going to offer a little bit better value than Speaker's Corner.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add. I didn't even really consider Collaborate for the reasons you mentioned. It does seem like he's a horse that needs Lasix, and he's just never really been that fast. He's never run a race that would make him competitive here. I guess the race wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention a favorite of mine, Diamond Dupes. Personally, I can't view him as a contender in here. He ran okay in his return race, but he hasn't been the same horse in quite a while from his really good races, like when he won the Mr. Prospector. He ran so well on the turf in the Shadwell. He ran behind Imperial Hint in the Vanderbilt. But he's a 70-year-old, and it seems like those days have passed, and I think he's just going to take more fan money than he really deserves.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that about Diamond Dupes. He'll probably be a bigger price than 6-1. I think he's not going to take that much money in this race, but I think he's seen better days. I'm actually a little more interested in one of his relatives, which is running later in the card, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Craig, let's move on to the next race in this sequence, race 11, the Mac Diarmida Grade 2 event, going 1 3/8 on the turf course. And Mike Maker, he always has a lot of these turf marathoners. I think he entered 4 in the WL McKnight trying to beat Aban back in late January. Couldn't do it that way, so Maker's entered 5 horses in this Mac Diarmida trying to take down the Todd Pletcher trained Aban. I don't know, can he do it this time? Because Aban does look pretty formidable off his last race.
He does. Aban's a horse that I wanted to beat last time, and he showed a little bit of a new dimension, being able to rate off the pace a little bit. He keeps improving his speed figures, so I'm going to lean on him pretty heavily in here. The only horse of the makers that I would try to beat him with is the one who finished closest to him last time. Or no, actually second closest. That's Media Blitz. And I only say that because last time was his first time trying the longer distances for Mike Maker. Usually it takes him a little bit. This is only his 3rd start in the barn. His first time out, he ran into Fort Lauderdale at 1 1/8. And I like the improvement he showed last time. So with any more improvement, I think he would be the main danger. And the others, I just can't get too interested in. So this is a race I'm going to be pretty short and key on Aban, but definitely use some Media Blitz as well.
Yeah, look, I'm not the biggest fan of Aban. I don't think he's some kind of superstar. I doubt he makes it to the Breeders' Cup Turf at the end of the year, but I think that he's finding the right fields in these early season graded stakes events, going these marathon distances at Gulfstream. So I don't want to take some big stand against him in this race because I was frankly completely wrong about him last time, and you have to make some adjustments when you're proven to have a bad opinion. So I do respect Aban in this race, and I ultimately made the decision I didn't want to take the horses that finished behind Aban last time because, frankly, I didn't think any of them had a major excuse. Temple did close some ground in a race where not too many horses were making up that much ground, but he's still just Temple. He's not the most reliable win candidate, and he could get a similar kind of trip in this race. So I think Aban is way the horse to beat, like you do. Craig, the maker horse that interests me most, and the one horse that I'd be looking to use in conjunction with Aban as a main backup or maybe on the same tier, is a big long shot, and that's the number 2, Kygo. I know based on this horse's 2 North American starts, he does not look that appealing, but if you take a look at this horse's European form, he ran by far his two best races when they stretched him out to a mile and a half. His last couple races last August in France. Wasn't facing, stellar fields, but he ran a lot better in those races than he had in any of his prior starts. And just looking at this horse's pedigree, I mean, he's bred to run all day. I think that the plan with him when they purchased him from overseas had to have always been to try to eventually get him into these longer races. Now, he faced a pretty good horse when he made his first North American start in the Gio Ponte. He was obviously never beating, never surprised. Take a look at his last race at Tampa Bay Downs. The winner of that race, Cheryl Spite, is pretty good. Came back to win a graded stakes, I believe, in his very next start. And if you go back and watch the replay of that race, really pay attention to Kygo in the stretch, because I know it doesn't look like he's doing much running when you just view the running line, but this horse really took off in the final eighth of the mile and was flying past horses as they crossed the wire and galloped out really strongly. So I do think that he's one that has shown some subtle ability in his races so far in this country, and he's finally getting into the right kind of spot, going a distance that's more favorable to him. So I just think he's an interesting horse that's probably going to get totally lost on the tote board, and is one that I really wanted to highlight and use somewhere in this pick 5 sequence.
Well, all I can add is you've probably now made me have to play 3 horses, because I like everything you said, and I have no argument with it. I'll be honest, I kind of overlooked the horse based on the speed figures he'd been running. But yeah, you make some good points as to why he could run a better race. And admittedly, it's not like he's been way behind. I mean, I have a Bond at a 118 last time, and he's at a 113 at a much shorter distance. So I like it.
Yeah, the others in this race, they just didn't do a whole lot for me. I feel like we've talked about Shamrocket a lot over the past year. He's just not a horse that loves to win races. I do think that Shamrocket is getting back to the right surface here, turf. He's best on turf, but he just... Of the two Pletcher runners, I do prefer a Bond and his tactical speed. And I mean, another horse that could take money like Fantasioso. I know he's a big price on the morning line, but he is coming off a shared graded stakes victory last time, so maybe he'll attract some support here. But I think Fantasioso is the kind of horse that might want even longer than a mile and 3/8. So I wonder if he can get up going this distance, especially over a hard turf course like Gulfstream Park.
Yeah, it's I couldn't make really a case for any others in here as well. And one thing I didn't really mention is I think a Bond has a pretty decent tactical advantage. Safe conduct is shown in front of him. But I don't really think that horse is a strong contender in here. I mean, he's been running decently and his speed figures are okay, but I don't think he's a match for him. And the other horse we have shown in front of a Bond early is Temple. And honestly, who knows what Temple's going to do? He's so erratic. He can be last. He can be first. So that's just kind of one the algorithm has a tough time dealing with a horse like him.
Let's move on to the feature race at Gulfstream Park on Saturday, the penultimate leg of this Pick 5 sequence. Race 12, the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth for the 3-year-olds at Kentucky Derby Prep Race, or as Craig would probably say, the Florida Derby Prep Race, going a mile and a 16th with that short stretch run at Gulfstream Park, which I do think is important to note for different horses and their running styles in this race. Craig, it was announced earlier in the week we had a big scratch out of this race. The number 12, Mo Donegal, will not participate. I know the connections didn't like the post position in the first place, but he also came up with a temperature, so he's not running. I'm seeing in my TimeformUS PPs right now that there's a revised morning line for this race that has the 2 favorites a little bit shorter, and those 2 favorites are likely to be the number 2, Simplification, and the number 8, Emmanuel. Personally, I think Emmanuel's going to go favored in here as the remaining Todd Pletcher runner. And let's start the conversation with him, Craig. What do you make of a horse like this? Been so impressive in both career starts. As for his position on the pace projector, I'll let you talk about it in a little bit greater detail, but I think some people might be surprised to see him placed all the way back in mid-pack. But he is coming out of a race that featured a very slow pace. I'd view him more on the kind of pace that he set in his career debut.
Yeah, he probably shouldn't be as far back as he is, but I do think it's going to be a quick pace in here, and in no way do I think he's going to be on the lead with a horse like Dean Delivers in here, who's been sprinting his whole career, showing some speed. High Oak showed a lot of high speed early in his career in sprints. Now, they weren't on the lead in those sprint races, but they're running fast, and I have to be honest, I won't be shocked if Emmanuel wins, but he's the kind of horse I have to take a shot against. I just think his last race was nothing but a workout at most, and this is just a huge jump up for me. So personally, I'm not using Emmanuel.
Yeah, I agree with your take. I think that Emmanuel has some things to prove stepping up in class. And from a value standpoint, I think that playing against him is a decent strategy here because he's got all of the trappings of a horse that's going to be overbet, going out for the Todd Pletcher barn. Such a visually impressive winner last time. But the pace situation is a concern. And also, I was looking up some statistics for Todd Pletcher, Craig, and he really doesn't have great numbers stretching horses out. Not stretching horses out. In graded stakes races at a mile and a 16th at Gulfstream. I was kind of looking up some stats over the past 5 years, and I was really shocked to discover that Todd Pletcher's just won 2 races at a mile and a 16th that are graded stakes at Gulfstream during that time. It's an odd distance. I don't know exactly why that would be the case. It could just be an aberration, but I think it's something that's worth noting with a horse that I do think is going to be a pretty short price in here. I do think he's talented. He showed a lot of ability in his workouts. He's carrying it over to show it on the track in his career. So I just don't want him at the price that I think he's going to be. Craig, the Holy Bull is a race that was a little bit difficult, I know, for you as a speed figure maker. Some had that figure for the winner, Abario, a lot faster. I know that you had it lower than some others. Simplification, though, he did run pretty well in that race, having missed the start, making that move from off the pace, not a running style that he really used to any success in the past. What do you make of him in this race? Because he definitely won the post position draw coming out towards the number 2 hole towards the inside.
Yeah, he's an obvious contender, no matter what speed figures you use. I'll just add on that if you believe that the Holy Bull was some really fast race, as some have it, then he should probably be your Derby bet because to overcome that trip and run really fast. He didn't overcome it, obviously. He ran second, but he ran decent. But I'm pretty confident in that number. I'm not going to get too carried away on him. I'm certainly not going to single him in here. He's a horse I do think you have to use. I think he's a strong contender. But there's some other horses that I'm interested in. I'll start with In Due Time, the 4 horse. He's a horse who won an allowance race really easily last time. And if you look up that race, it's actually turned out to be a decent race. A couple horses who finished behind him ran 1-2 in a nice allowance race at Gulfstream Park a couple days ago. I don't have the official speed figure for that one, but it's going to be in the mid-hundreds is what I would imagine. So he beat a couple pretty good horses, and he just seems like a horse that's going in the right direction to me. The 2 turns doesn't look like it's going to be much of a problem. I like his inside draw, and I think he's a danger in here. The other one that I like is an even much bigger price, and that's a different horse shipping in from Tampa, and that's Markamian. I was really impressed when I went back and watched his race, the Pasco, which is normally a prep for the Tampa Bay Derby. But he shows up in Florida, and he's a horse who's just run better and better figures every time. He draws the really nice inside post position in here. He's got high early speed. But what impressed me the most with him is when you watch the replay, he was on the rail, he was battling for the lead, and 2 lower price horses than him, I think it was the favorite and second choice, ranged up outside, actually looked like they got their heads in front of them, were going to go right by, and this guy just dug in and took off again on the rail. So that really impressed me. He has a similar speed figure to Simplification, so he's actually going to be my top pick in here.
I like it, Craig. Going for a horse that I think is guaranteed to be a pretty big price in that rail horse Markamian. I will say, he's not shown on the front end of the pace projector, but I have to imagine this horse is going to be in front early if they don't take advantage of that rail post position heading right into that clubhouse turn. I think they're silly, especially with another speed horse to his outside in Simplification. If that one breaks, you have to think that Markamian's going to have to be ridden a little bit to hold that rail position. So I would imagine that he will be setting the pace in this race, and it's often not a bad place to be in these mile and the 16th races at Gulfstream Park. We'll see if he gets the distance. My read of his pedigree is that it's a lot of sprint influences on the dam side, but social inclusion. He was a horse that wanted to go long, the sire. So we'll see what he can do. I went for a different price horse, but I like your moxie of taking a 20-1 morning line shot. It's a race where I did think that a lot of the contenders looked pretty evenly matched. So from a speed figure standpoint in particular, so I didn't want to default to the shorter prices. I'll just say I echo everything you said about that logical horse In Due Time, the 4. I probably, if I had to redo my picks, would move him up a little bit. I think I made him my 4th pick when I did my preview of this race for DRF earlier in the week, and there are things to like about him, and I think the fact that those horses that ran behind him did so well in that allowance race earlier this week at Gulfstream does bolster the strength of that last speed figure. So I do believe that In Due Time is a major player in this race. I'll just go right into my crazy pick, Craig. The number 11, Oh Captain, I know looks ridiculous on speed figures. He's the slowest horse in the race and has never run the kind of number that would be remotely competitive in the Fountain of Youth. But this horse was pretty impressive when he won his debut at Gulfstream Park all the way back in August of his 2-year-old season. And to me, when I watch that race, just kind of has a stride and a way of moving that suggests that he's not a 5.5 furlong horse. He's going to want to go longer eventually. And he had, I think, a slight setback after that, was off for a number of months, came back in the Limehouse in early January, a race to me that just looked like purely a prep for a horse that wants to go longer. Was not ridden that hard in that race. Had a little bit of a trouble on the backstretch when a horse kind of got injured in front of him and he had to go around that horse. And he was running on a little bit in the late stages, and they're targeting a pretty ambitious spot with this horse to step all the way up in the Fountain of Youth. So it says to me that the connections, they've got to like this horse a little bit. And when I look at the pedigree, it says to me that this horse really is meant to go this distance. Carpe Diem is not a sire that necessarily sets the world on fire, but he does get horses that want to go longer. And the dam side, it's all route breeding. The dam Mama Nadine was actually a pretty good dirt router. She's produced a horse named Royal Sun who ran in some stakes as a 3-year-old going longer, turned out to be a pretty good horse in route and synthetic races. And I just think that this horse is going to take a big step forward with the distance. Whether it's good enough to even hit the board here remains to be seen, but he's going to be a big price in this race. And his trainer, Gustavo Delgado, he's connected with some big prices or gotten some big prices to outrun the rods in races like this in the past. I mean, I think of a horse like Bodie Express, who I think was second in the Florida Derby off a similar step up in class at 70-1. So I just think that this is an interesting horse that I can make a case for that is not going to attract any tote support.
If you're looking for a guy to argue with you on a 30-1 shot, you've come to the wrong place. I would. If the horse was 5-2 or even 5-1, I would be concerned about the post. But when you're betting that kind of price, I mean, what difference does it make? You're taking the worst of it, from the post. But so what? Maybe you can work out a good trip from out there. So no argument from me. Couple others I did want to just touch on a little bit. I had mentioned Dean Delivers. He's one that comes out of the Swale. He ran a really good race behind My Prankster, just beat a half a length. I just personally don't see him as a horse that wants any parts of 2 turns. Seems like maybe the connections have Derby fever. And after I turn it back over to you, I want to talk about one more horse. I'll be curious to hear what you think about its breeding and such. And the other is Rattle and Roll. He's a horse who comes out of the Grade 1 Breeders' Futurity, an easy win that day. We've seen a lot of different horses come back out of that race to run well and actually win some of these Derby points races. But to me, this just seems like a race where I would be very surprised if he's fully cranked. And even if he is, something we've kind of hinted about, but this mile on the 16th at Gulfstream does no favors to deep closers. And make no mistake, he is a deep closer. He's never close early, and I just don't give him much of a chance at all in here.
Yeah, we have pretty similar feelings about those two horses, and I'm glad you brought each of them up. I actually like Dean Delivers as a horse. I think he's pretty good as a sprinter. I just don't really view him as one that wants to go this far. I was looking up some breeding stats in DRF Formulator, and actually his sire, Cajun Breeze, who is a sire that has a lot of horses running on the Florida circuit, Cajun Breeze has never sired a horse that's won a dirt route. None of his progeny have ever won a race at a mile or longer on the dirt. So that's a bit of a concern for Dean Delivers, who's trying it in the Fountain of Youth. And as for Rattle and Roll, I wasn't the biggest fan of the Breeders' Futurity at the time last year. I guess the speed figure looks somewhat competitive here in retrospect, and he could improve in his 3-year-old debut, but he had a setback that forced him to miss the Breeders' Cup Juvenile last year. I've been watching some of his training videos coming off the layoff. I haven't been that impressed. It doesn't look like he's done a whole lot of growing since last year. He's been very washy in his morning training, just looking like a horse that's probably going to need a race. So I wanted to kind of steer clear of him. Craig, let's close things out with the final leg of this Pick 5 sequence. The Grade 3 Here Comes the Bride, going a mile on the turf for the 3-year-old fillies. And I think this is a pretty interesting race to finish things up. A lot of ways you can go. Looks like it's going to be a wide open tote board. A lot of horses with promise, but have some things to prove in here. I'm not even really sure where to start. You've got some horses that were competitive in Stakes Company recently, including a few that are coming off victories at Gulfstream Park. So I guess we could make the center of this race number 8, Opalina, since she's kind of drawn to the center of the field. She's coming off that graded stakes win in the Swedish Chant. Watching that race, I thought that she actually ran pretty well. That seemed like it was a pretty fast pace, and she was the first one to come attack it from the back of the pack, and the horses that finished directly behind her were making big runs from even further back. So I thought she kicked on pretty well to hold those closers at bay after making that first move to kind of break the race open. I think Opalina is pretty good, and that she's kind of had the experience under her belt to, have the foundation to tackle a race like this that looks so deep and competitive. But I don't think she has a huge edge over this field. There are a lot of other contenders to consider.
Yeah, I agree. I think she's fine, but she's never the kind of horse I want to take as a favorite because almost everybody in the fields ran just as fast as she has. I think her trip was fine last time. I don't think it was a great trip. I don't think it was a bad trip. It was just kind of a trip. So I started looking at the field, and the first horse that really caught my interest was Mischievous Kiss for Bill Mott. And I liked what I saw from her in some of her races, and I wound up not landing on her as my top pick. I'll get to that in a second, but I think she's fine. She ran a better speed figure in November of her 2-year-old season at Belmont. Got 100 speed figure that day. Had a nice fast pace to close into. But what I liked is it's not like she came from way back and got up in the last few strides. She had actually seized command before they even got to the furlong pole. She was well in front. Then she kind of had to hold on. So she made a bit of an early wide move. But I liked that she was able to win. And then I thought her last trip was just kind of a disaster. Even though she closed at the end, was only beaten a length. I just thought a lot of things went wrong. She was kind of caught floating on the outside, kind of made a move, then backed off, then made another move. So I almost think had she won, she would have overcame the ride that day. It just wasn't a very good ride. So she's a horse that I definitely have to use. And I was thinking I was going to make her my top contender because as I thought I recognized most of the names, but then I went and watched Diamond Wow and the Jessamine, and the light clicked on. I remembered that run, and I think I actually have her in my stable mail. She had come back, but she came back on dirt for some unknown reason. And she was a horse who just had a disastrous trip in the Jessamine. Now, I wouldn't say it was any fault of Mike Smith. She drew the 13 hole that day, but she was just wide all the way around the track. Had to make a big move wide on both turns and looked like she was going to win until the very last stride. Her speed figure was only a 94 that day, but again, that was her 2-year-old season. That was actually back in October. And when you look at a horse like the favorite, Opalina, she ran a 96 just a month ago. So Diamond Wow is one that I actually really like in here. She would be my top pick and a horse I would use as an A. The only other horse I'm really considering in here would be if she draws in, and that's the also eligible Dolce Zell. And That's just strictly because it's a first time Chad Brown with an import and Irad Ortiz named. And there's no way if I'm live at this point in the card that I'm going to not cash if those two draw in and win the race.
Yeah, we have a very similar opinion of Diamond Wow. I echo everything that you said. I know that I had talked about it at the time last year when she ran in the Jessamine that I thought she ran great in that race. I had more hope at the start of her career that she could be a dirt horse, but hasn't really panned out that way, and I agree with you. She just seems like she's better on the turf. She is the younger relative of Diamond Dupes that I was referencing a little bit earlier, going out for those same connections, Patrick B. and Co., and I believe that in horse terms, Diamond Dupes would be her uncle. But Diamond Wow, I agree with everything you said about the Jessamine and the post. She's drawn much better in this race. And the one thing that I'll add is they're putting the blinkers on. I'm not going to be surprised if she's a bit more forwardly placed, which I actually like for her. I think she's got the tactical speed to work out a trip that's forward. And also, I watched her recent workout over Palm Meadows on February 25th, and it was pretty impressive. I don't know if the horse that she was working in company with has any ability, but boy, was superior to that horse, just kind of running right by him in the stretch with a really impressive turn of foot. So I think that Diamond Wow is very interesting in this race. And given the way that they bet jockeys at Gulfstream Park, I could see her being a decent price in this race with Romero Mirage, a pretty low-profile rider named aboard her. He's been her regular rider, so I think that she is definitely interesting. And for me, Craig, the other horse that I do want to focus on is one that you didn't mention, the number 4, Spenderella. If you haven't seen her debut, I would go back and watch it. It was extremely impressive. I know that she got a good trip. She was up close to a moderate pace and just kind of took over, but it was more the way she did it. Jose Ortiz really didn't have to do that much steering at all. She was just super professional, showed a really nice turn of foot and upper stretch, and she won away from that field pretty well to win by nearly 3 lengths. The winner up in that race, Al Kahira, she was a big favorite that day, and she's a horse that looks like she's okay. She actually finished ahead of Beside Herself, who's drawn 1 slot outside of Spenderella in the number 5 post here in her second start, and Spenderella was easily better than that foe last time, so I think that she's pretty good. She's got the pedigree to be a good one. She's actually a full sister to Spanish Love Affair, a Mark Casse horse that you might remember from last year, running in a lot of these 3-year-old filly graded stakes races on the turf, and she's also a half to Grade 1 American Oaks winner, Spanish Queen, so there's a lot of signs pointing to Spenderella being a pretty good horse, and Graham Motion certainly knows what to do with a good one like that. So I view her and Diamond Wow as ones that can work out good forwardly placed trips. I don't see this pace as being terribly fast, and I want horses that don't have to come from that far back in what I think is going to be a pretty congested field. So I'm going to key mostly on those two. I'll use Opalina. I'm not against her. I just think if she is a short price, she's not a horse that I wanted to be undervalued on. And I guess there are some others you could mention. I'm not totally against the horse that you like, Craig, Mischievous Kiss, but I was more interested in the 2 drawn just to her outside.
Yeah, I will have to go back and watch that replay. I admittedly have not. Any thoughts on Beside Herself? I wasn't blown away by her last race. To me, that was just a really easy trip against a field that's not that good. It is, I mentioned Irad Ortiz. He's actually named on this horse first and foremost, so I'm not sure what would happen if the 13 were able to draw in. It's always dangerous leaving him off at Gulfstream. He obviously wins a lot of races, but this horse just wasn't for me.
Yeah, I thought that Beside Herself got a great trip last time, just able to set what was a pretty moderate pace, and she kicked for home. I thought that the field that Spenderella beat was better, so I liked her more. We'll see how the prices shake out. I thought Spenderella was going to be a shorter price on the line. She's 6-1. I think that fair odds on her are closer to 7-2. Whereas Beside Herself, I would need a bigger price on because I don't like the ratio that she's coming out of that much. One other horse I would mention, Craig, is the number 12, Leah Marina. Don't love the post position, but I thought she was pretty game in victory last time. I just wonder how that wait a while back from December really compares to the field that she's meeting here. I think she's probably stepping up in class a little bit, but she ran the exact same TimeformUS speed figure as Opalina did, just did it a few months earlier.
Yes, she did. I don't know how reliable that speed figure is. That's back when Gulfstream had just opened, and it was they weren't timing the races at all, really. If I remember right, the turf races, we were just getting final times. And I mean, the fraction seems to have held up from a couple of the runbacks we had. I just wonder, it seems like an odd time to take 3 months off with a horse that seemed to be in really good form.
Well, let's wrap things up by doing a quick review of how we view these races, Craig. This time I'll go first. I usually let you go first. In the Honey Fox, going back to the first leg, I am most interested in Gift List and Jouster. I'm a little concerned about the pace for Jouster, but I'm too afraid of her ability to leave her off. And I would use horses like Bipartisanship, maybe as a backup just because of the pace. And also in Italian, I'm anticipating she's going to get bet down, so I might have to leave her off because I think I'd need a bigger price than she's going to be. In the 10th race, the Gulfstream Park Mile, I just think Speaker's Corner is way the horse to beat. And for me, the backup is Endorsed and maybe a little bit of Fearless and Injunction. Both of those, depending on the price. Injunction, I'd want a bigger price on. I'm not quite as bullish on his chances as Craig is. And Fearless, I think he had his chance to beat Speaker's Corner last time, but he definitely is a contender in that race. The 11th, the McDarmida, I really just like the two inside runners. Aban, who nothing clever, but I think he's a horse that I can't really make a strong case against. And the number 2, Kaiko, who is my horse that I think is going to offer the most value and is one that, even regardless of the pick 5 sequence, I'd want to play in some win wagers and play around with the exacta with Aban, even if I can't get him in that multi-race sequence. And then moving on to the Fountain of Youth, a race that I think you could spread a little bit. I do like that crazy long shot, the number 11, O Captain, but not the kind of horse I'd want to key on in this kind of sequence. I do think that simplification makes plenty of sense, as does the number 4, In Due Time, all horses that I would use in that race. And then I would close things out by leaning most heavily in the Here Comes the Bride on the number 3, Diamond Wow, and the number 4, Spenderella.
Yeah, and the Honey Fox, I tend to agree with you. I'm on Gift List as my main choice in there, and I'll use horses like Alms and Bipartisanship. Bipartisanship, if he gets or she gets that pace to close into, and Alms is one I don't think needs to be on the lead. Could kind of fall into that first run on the fast pace that I expect. The Gulfstream Park Mile, I think Speaker's Corner is the one to beat. I had New York Traffic as more a B or C type, but you've kind of swayed me that I'm going to go watch those works and maybe not use that one. I'm definitely going to use Injunction as a B type. And then horses I'd use as C types include Fearless and Endorsed. I worry a little bit that Endorsed, his figure's a bit of a suck-up kind, but when you watch the race, he was actually in it a little early, so he could be a case where he actually did improve in that Pegasus despite being beaten like almost 10 lengths. In the McDiarmida, Aban for me is clearly the one to beat. You've talked me in the Kygo, and I'll also use a little bit of Media Blitz. The Fountain of Youth is where I'm going for a big price in Markamian. I love his inside draw. I love his gameness that he showed in the Pasco at Tampa. And I'm just not convinced simplification is as good as his odds are going to indicate, particularly off that last trip. I'm also going to use In Due Time, who I think his race was really good. And he's a couple runners from that race have come back and shown that speed fig is legit. And then in the last race, I'm going to lean on Mischievous Kiss, don't want to confuse him with Mischievous Alex. Mischievous Kiss and Diamond Wow. I'll also use Dolce Zell if he draws in, and I'm going to watch that replay of Spenderella, and I'm sure you're spot on, and I'll have to use that one.
Well, that's a look at that late pick 5 sequence at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. Regardless of how Craig and I do with our opinions, we will be recapping all of those races for sure on the TimeformUS Pacecast next week, because I'm sure there are going to be some nice performances that are worth discussing. Big weekend coming up. Good luck if you're playing at Gulfstream or Aqueduct, where they have that interesting Gotham. I did put out a video of that on the Daily Racing Form YouTube channel if you want to check out my analysis of that race, and also that good card at Santa Anita where they're running the San Felipe, the Kilroe Mile, the Santa Anita Handicap, as well as some others. So big weekend in racing, Craig. A lot to look forward to. I'm sure we're going to have a big show on the Pacecast next week. And remember, if you want to listen to this podcast or any of the others that we do, you can check them out on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Everybody, thanks for listening this week. Good luck this weekend, and tune into that TimeformUS Pacecast next week.